Welcome back, everyone. Let's see, Holly's there. Okay, great. Holly always has a great background, different Nantucket background. I'm going to introduce you all to Holly Backus, who I think many of you know, but some of you might not. Holly Backus has been a land use planner for almost 15 years. However, in November of 2019, she was promoted as the first preservation planner for the town of Nantucket. In addition, she's the town's local hazard mitigation plan coordinator and has successfully managed the project to update the plan for FEMA approval in March of 2019. She's highly involved in the town's resiliency and sustainability planning efforts. In addition, she is staff liaison to both the Nantucket Historic District Commission and the Nantucket Historical Commission, which are two separate commissions. And occasionally participates in the town's Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee. Holly has a bachelor's degree in historic preservation and art and architectural history from Roger Williams University and a graduate certificate from the University of Florida's Preservation Institute, Nantucket. After college, she became a land use planner for Berkeley County, in South Carolina, a fast-growing county outside Charleston. And she was there for about 10 years. Holly is a Nantucket native and is happy to be back home, helping her island plan appropriately for the protection of the island's historic and cultural resources and the changing climate. And we are so happy and lucky that Holly is our preservation planner. So we'll turn it over to Holly and we'll see just what is going on in Nantucket when it relates to solar guidelines.
Thank you very much, Mary. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak to you all again. Thank you for that great introduction as well. So as renewable energy and the Nantucket Historic District comes together, and as the HDC and the Historical Commission's staff liaison, of course, I get to review anything that's old, which I love. So I can't sit here without talking about the greenest building. The greenest building is existing. It's the one that's already built. The National Trust for Historic Preservation, of course, likes to remind folks what does that mean? And it takes 65 years for the energy efficient building to save the amount of energy loss when an existing building is demolished. The U.S. Energy Information Agency data indicates that buildings constructed before 1920 are more energy efficient than those built during energy efficient than those built at any time afterwards, except for those obviously built after 2000. And GSA, the General Services Administration, they examined the building inventory in 1999 and found that utility costs for historic buildings were 27% less than more than the modern buildings. Really something to think about. So I can't sit here and talk about the HDC without obviously talking about the National Historic Landmark District and the local district. Of course, you all know more than likely now that Nantucket, not only are we a local district created in 1955 by a special act with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and it was updated in 1970. So the entire island is a local district, but also in 1966, the same year of the passing of the National Historic Preservation Act in 1966, we became obviously a National Historic Landmark. And then through CPC funding and the helm of the Nantucket Preservation Trust in 2012, the NHL was updated to include more of our significance with tourism and historic preservation, and obviously including the sister islands within that as well. And I want to also point out, if you look at the certificate, which the town clerk's office has on file here at the town, it says that that this site, being the islands of Nantucket, has been found to possess exceptional significance in the illustrating or commemorating the history of the United States for the benefit and inspiration of the American people. That's pretty profound. So the Historic District Commission, for those of you that may or may not know, under the special act, they were basically for three categories. They're to promote the general welfare and the inhabitants of the town of Nantucket, one, through the preservation and protection of historic buildings, places, districts, and interests, through the development of an appropriate setting for buildings, places, and districts, and through the benefits resulting to the economy of Nantucket in developing and maintaining its vacation level industry through the promotion of these historic associations. Building with Nantucket in mind, obviously, is our guidebook. It sets policies and a common understanding on the forms and construction of design, which is what the HDC uses in their review of applications for hours every week, as Mary had mentioned. No new construction be considered as an isolated object in either time or space. Design should exhibit and repose the unpretentiousness that belongs to this weathered island. And one thing to really understand is that Building with Nantucket in mind wasn't created in a vacuum. They follow the Secretary of the Interior standards for preservation, restoration, reconstruction, and rehabilitation. Then the community takes responsibility for the architectural heritage through the commissioners of the HDC to enjoy the individual as well as the collective structural richness of that defines the town. And within Building with Nantucket in mind, we have these 5 sections: the preservation on Nantucket Island, understanding Nantucket's architectural heritage, building within existing context, building in outlying areas, and commercial development, renewable energy, and the Nantucket Historic District Commission. This is pretty something that's profound. This came from the Clean Air, Cool Planet study, where they said that the people of Nantucket have recognized the natural resource conservation and long-term, sustainability are essential to the island's continued vitality. So, my apologies here. So this is the study that came out in 2009, where the Nantucket HDC, along with Sustainable Nantucket, reviewed and adopted the solar guidelines that you see before the commission, what they use day in, day out when it comes to reviewing solar. This was the Nantucket Energy Study Committee that made up of architects and designers, and didn't realize until this past year that the guidelines that are used by the HDC were actually included in this Cool Air, Cool Planet. Pretty cool. As Mary had mentioned in her presentation and showing a photo of the oldest house, called the oldest house, but it's not the oldest house, but I'll leave that for another time. One of Nantucket's oldest houses owned by the NHA, being a salt box that was built in the 18th century. Again, we look to our historic architecture where they were really built with climate and energy in mind. And you sit here and say, how was this done? Well, the structure is facing south. It faces towards the winter sun. It faces away from that winter wind going up the side. Limited windows on the north elevation. The roof is a low sloping and it carries the north winds away. And of course the overhangs help with shade in the summertime. So again, looking at how our structures were created first on Nantucket, and maybe we need to look back on not just the architecture itself, but more on that siting for climate resiliency. Again, this energy efficiency, renewable energy and historic preservation guide for historic districts, which Nantucket is a case study for, also indicates how Nantucket's historic architecture is known throughout the world, and really talks about the other things besides just solar. It also talks about wind and making sure your windows are obviously efficient. Nantucket has unique architecture. It's part of the retention is being built resilient in what we have. So of course those windows are big. Should you restore or should you replace? It's important to remember that windows are an important aspect of the architectural character of a historic building. Look to the National Park Service for guidance on repairing these windows versus replacing them. And if you must replace them, well, make sure that they follow the requirements. As well as, keynote for anybody who has a historic structure within Nantucket, you need, if you ever did want to replace your windows, you need to have this window survey. Very, very important. And again, it follows National Park Service brief number 9. And going back to sustainable preservation, Sustainable Nantucket helps with this. And these are the top outcomes that came out of it. So this is what you see on the town's website. And this is the case study that's associated with the document that I'm mentioning. Pretty cool. So not obviously on a primary structure, should be on a secondary or an ancillary structure, not on the main mass. Minimum visual impact with screening. A higher level of scrutiny obviously is associated with our old historic districts. And that's outlined within the guide that it is appropriate to consider the placement on the property, especially if it is a contributing structure where the use of technology may have a higher degree of visual impact. So not that it wouldn't be approved, but that's going to have a very, very high scrutiny. And of course, the color of the panels in keeping with the surrounding roof materials. Those are the main requirements for solar review for the Historic District Commission. I will say that, visual from a public traveled way is very, very important for any solar. And I recommend if you are going to submit something to the HTC that you make sure that you show that. How are you going to make it so it's less visual? So I wanted to bring on an example that was before the HDC recently. I'm not going to name the designer or the submitter agent, I should say, or this location, but I thought this was a great example. This is on a secondary structure. It's facing away from the publicly traveled way, and it also includes the entire roof plane. So again, non-contributing secondary structure, minimal visual impact, not located with the old 55 district. That's what I always reference, those two local 55 districts, because that's where a lot of the scrutiny is with our advisory board areas. However, again, as Mary had mentioned, the entire island is a local district since 1970. Again, the color of the panels matches the roof, and the panels fill the entire roof plane. How can preservation community be a part of the answer? We work together. Obviously, I work very closely with the town's energy coordinator, Lauren Sinatra, also a friend. We want to make sure that we're doing everything appropriate from a sustainability perspective, but also from the historic district's perspective. HDC, preservation specialists, and again, those energy professionals. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention about Lauren again. Here, she is the one that handles a great local solar rebate program. Anybody has any questions about what people have been able to do? Of course, these are some projects that have been vetted through the HDC. I would recommend for you to contact her. So Mary had alluded to the HDC approving solar installations, and they have been doing that, doing a fantabulous job. In fiscal year 2019, they approved a total of 55. Fiscal year 2020, they approved a total of 81 installations. That's a total of 136 new solar projects, whether they're on the roof or a ground array. That's great news, and that's that there's it's great to see it from a resiliency perspective, but also from the HDC. So kudos to them. And here's Easy Street Basin from many years ago. I put this photo in here because we want to make sure that these changes that are done for sustainability and resilience are successful, and it's not done without compromising the character or of the historic district. I think that's really, really important to focus on. So Mary alluded to the Secretary of Interior standards. When it comes to the 4 treatments that we go by, there's restoration, preservation, reconstruction, rehabilitation. And the Secretary of Interior standards has these great illustrated, if you have not taken a look at it, please do. They have great illustrated design guidelines or guidelines specifically for sustainability. And that obviously includes our solar. And they also when you look at them, they'll defer on something that's recommended versus not recommended. That's obviously very important for historic district to take in consideration, and obviously homeowners with historic structures. You want to make sure that you're doing something that's not going to reduce or negatively affect your contributing status on your structure. So here's some examples I thought were great to bring up to you all. This is obviously not Nantucket, but this is a historic structure located somewhere in the United States, where they've indicated that installing a solar device on a historic building in a manner that does not damage the historic roofing material or negatively impact the building's historic character is reversible. That reversibility that Mary was mentioning, that's very key and very important. And installing a solar device in a compatible location on a site or on a non-historic building or addition where it will have a minimal impact on the historic building and its site. And as you can see here, that's where they place it on this awning. So here is an example, again, not Nantucket, but these are historic buildings somewhere in the United States. And this is a recommendation to not do. Do not install a solar device on a historic building in a manner that's going to negatively impact, as well as it is replacing or incompatible material that's not reversible. Installing a solar device in a prominent location on a building where it will negatively impact the historic character, again, retaining that historic quality. Removing the historic roof features to install the solar panels, big no-no. Altering a historic character defining feature, roof shape to install the panels, big no-no. And installing a solar device that are not reversible. Again, that reversibility is very, very important. Placing a solar device in a highly visible location where it will negatively impact the historic building and its site. Not a good thing to look at. But I also wanted to mention that, you know, take a sidebar a little bit on solar in general. This is a great photo that the NHA has, and that's what I use for all my photos, like the photo behind me. This is 1921 Comet Water Company, and you may know this structure if you drive on Orange Street to town, you drive by it. This used to be the poorhouse. It's a great example of reuse. Again, a form of sustainability, a form of resiliency, really, sustainable, because that structure used to be the poorhouse and now it's the landmark house. So I also wanted to mention a little bit about what the world of preservation and energy, because it's not new, but it's also evolving. And if this is a document that came out in April of this year by Sarah Bronin. If you're not familiar with Sarah Bronin, I highly recommend you looking up her LinkedIn information. She's an architect, professor, author on many land use and historic preservation law books and treaties. She's written on climate change, renewable energy, housing, urban planning, transportation, and she was appointed by the president to sit on the Advisory Council of Historic Preservation. I'm not too sure where that has been, but I know she's a busy lady. She's also an advisor for the National Trust for Historic Preservation and Sustainable Development Code. She's also served on preservation commissions. And if you're familiar with Hartford, Connecticut, she helped adopt a climate action plan. So this was a document that she came out with, aligning historic preservation and energy efficiency. And some of the key points that I took out of this document, and I tell you, every time I see something that she's written, I go and get it, or I print a copy to review. Demolitions cause more waste and energy than rehabilitation of older structures. Makes sense. Historic structures are exempt from building or energy building codes. However, most people want to increase their energy efficiency. So what can be done? Sometimes the Secretary of the Interior's standards can deter energy efficiency. That's, again, something to be looking at. And then the Secretary of the Interior should be updated to provide more help and assistance with renewable energy. Older buildings that remain Today, we're often constructed using more durable and longer lasting traditional materials. Very true. I can even point out to some structures that I know personally, their roofs are older than me because those materials were built or were created in a different time frame and made to last. And another one, obviously, is the Secretary of Interior's govern the majority of the historic building construction activity and not the energy conservation building codes. So this is another photo that I use in my background with Zoom meetings with the HDC and Historical Commission. But just take a look at this photo of Nantucket. And thank you to the NHA for this photo. I don't know the date, my apologies. But it gives a glimpse into that simple life of Nantucket and that essence, that quality. Just you could imagine just looking to see what it looks like today, and there's probably not that much change, but some cool information to consider. In 2004, Booking Institute report projects that by 2030, which is only in 9 more years, we will have demolished and replaced 82 billion square feet of current housing stock nationwide. And the amount of energy required to demolish and rebuild that 82 billion square feet would power the state of California for 10 years. Pretty crazy. And rehabilitating just 10% of those would save enough power and energy to power New York for more than a year. And I will extend my appreciation to the National Trust for Historic Preservation for those quotes. So from a Nantucket perspective, I would be remiss as not only a preservation planner, but also the HMP coordinator. Mary alluded to the hazard mitigation plan. And I think it's important because yes, it's a FEMA federal document that allows the town to be able to receive funding in case of a natural disaster. But what's important for me to point out is our area of concerns that are listed here. These were the 5 areas that came out of the update in 2019. And I've mentioned about our historical and cultural resources, but the biggie here is our power supply resiliency and climate change. It's a big thing in many avenues and facets. It's not just, we're going through our coastal resiliency plan right now. It's all a part of the island planning aspect, and one planning document reaches to another. Also wanted to mention about Nantucket also becoming a certified local government. Mary talked about the surveys, how they're very, very important, that you can't protect what you don't know what you have. And with that, we became a certified local government with the National Park Service. In March of last year, we were able to apply for some federal funding. And this is important because we do need to update our surveys. And so with this joint collaboration between the 2 commissions and becoming a CLG, we were able to apply for the funding, and we're going to be starting a project to update some of these surveys. And this will be a multi-year process. So I just want to sit here and thank the commissions as well as our select board and town officials for the support in becoming a CLG. And of course, another aspect about resiliency was our Resilient Nantucket Design Guidelines that were unanimously adopted by the HDC this past June. I thank everybody who have been involved in this process, especially the Nantucket Preservation Trust for their continued support and our effort with this, and the public. Thank you. Very, very helpful. And this is back down to our solar. I just wanted to put this in here. Of course, this is a newer structure in Mid-Island near the Stop and Shop. And it's an example of how solar can be discrete, but meet the needs of both the applicant and the HDC. So of course, this is one of our NERDA, it'll always NERDA to me, the Wave shuttle bus stop that has a little solar over the pergola, which you can't really see when you drive up to it and only see it when you're looking down. So that's a great example of showing it within a non-historic aspect. And again, if there's anything that you want to take away from me today, and thank you MPT for having me again, is that historic preservation is sustainable. And if you are familiar with or if you're not familiar, the select board has a strategic plan that they've put into place, and both historic preservation and sustainability is right there in their definition. That is a part of their thinking process to planning for our National Historic Landmark. And of course, all of us preservationists appreciate that. Historic preservation promotes the reuse of structures. Yes, it does. And I can tell you that the HTC, looks beyond what's in their purview, but we need to work on that more as a town. Our oldest buildings are green and sustainable. Yes, they are. And the Nantucket HDC has clear guidelines for solar that follow the Secretary of the Interior's standards for sustainability. It's important to minimize the adverse effects of solar upon the structure's existing historic fabric. And with that, I believe that's all I have. Guess I'll stop share. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. That was really informative, and I think a great reminder that it's not either or. It's not, we have like new LEED certified green buildings, or we have old buildings. I think Ben's presentation this morning was really important to remind us all just the changes, little changes that could be made to weatherize a building and to make it more energy efficient. And I think your examples of, what solar, was good, what solar might not work for Nantucket, really engaging. So of course, as always, if anybody has any questions, please put them there in the chat. I also think so much of this, gosh, I look at the environmental movement and historic preservation, and I think how the environmental movement has a much better PR team than we do. If you look at so much of this is just correcting misconceptions. When you look at how many solar installations the Historic District Commission has approved in the last number of years, but it's the ones that get denied and overturned that cause a lot of anything that's controversial, right, is going to capture the attention of the public. Just like those examples I was sharing. So, okay, here we go. That's interesting. A question, an anonymous attendee asks, there've been a lot of conversation, there's thankfully been a lot of conversations about solar on Nantucket, but it's such a windy island. What can we do to allow for wind turbines? Are there HCC regulations or guidelines for home turbines? There's only one turbine at a home I can think of on the island. But
well, we have obviously our historic windmill. So wind production has been a thing on Nantucket. I had a photo of some of our past windmills. So of course that's part of it. And you all know about the one at the high school that was done. Oh gosh, I think I was living in South Carolina when it was installed. But that was obviously a good effort as well. I wasn't privy to that discussion, obviously, with the HDC and how that went about. So I can't really give 100% on that.
True. And I know there was the one at Bartlett's as well, and they had a number of issues with the functionality of it. I think the McVickers have a smaller windmill on Vesper.
Yes, I believe that's been there for quite a while. I remember that as a kid. Yeah.
I think, that was Will who had asked that question. I'm thinking back to kind of what Nathaniel was saying yesterday. I think that one of the reasons why you don't see that is that the solar technology seems to have evolved pretty rapidly for home consumption, for individual use. If there's anybody on who could speak, who wants to add in more about wind, they certainly.
I can speak to a little bit of the solar aspect. It was. My grandfather actually had a Nantucket solar components company in the 70s, where it wasn't really obviously to create the energy, but it was to heat your water for your home. But it's interesting to see how that technology has changed, and it continues to change. And that's would be where we would want to make sure that design guidelines aren't hindering that, but at the same time, the new technology isn't going to hinder, you know, the whole bottom line of having design guidelines in the first place.
Yeah, yeah.
And for the public, I will apologize about the background noise. I am in the town's office, and
Oh.
unfortunately, you know, I share space, so my sincere apologies.
No, I think it was once you got going, the noise sort of dissipated, I think. Yeah. I think that the real takeaway here is that it can't be done, and that it's about compromise. And if this is something that, you know, you want to have happen on your property, there may be a way to do it. There may not. What did you think, Holly? I just was wondering too about our design guidelines. I don't think they call out the idea of like looking at the significance of a structure relating to solar.
You know, I mean, there's a section in there that does talk about the significance, really more or less, you know, will the use of the technology, being the solar, will it have it will have a higher degree of visual impact. So they're going to be scrutinized to a high degree. I believe there's only been a handful of solar arrays on structures, on contributing structures that have been approved. I believe one during the pandemic this past year was on a bungalow on Main Street, more towards Keaton Circle. And that was because of the shallow, again, that pitch of the roof. Is it going to be visible? Where is it placed? Those are all things that need to be taken into consideration. And providing a mock-up, which I believe that agent did, for the commission to view is very important. And I think, and you'll probably agree with me, that the Nantucket HDC wants to work with folks. They don't want to deny things. They want to guide the agent, architect, whoever it may be, to make sure that it's going to be something that can be approved. They don't want to hinder, you know, they want to, especially when it comes to solar. But we also have commissioners that are they're by the book, and will say, for reasons which you need, any good commission or public body needs to make those findings, if you will, findings of fact. If something doesn't meet a qualification, but this is the reason why I'm going to approve it, you need to make sure it's clear. And you can't compare one to the other. They're apples and oranges. They have to go through their respective motions.
Yeah. I think that's kind of what the sense I'm getting just from watching all this, is that there isn't really a lot of precedent setting when it comes, because every house is cited differently. Every house is more or less significant. So it can be challenging. And I think that's why it can take some time to get these things through. The other, I guess, last question I would have for you before we take a little break, and then when we come back this afternoon, we will be checking out that bungalow a little bit, and I think people will have a hard time seeing it in the photos, because I certainly did. One of those guidelines for sustainable preservation, they were written in 2009. Where will there be an update of those guidelines?
There's been discussion of that. You know, I know that the HDC had their own little subcommittee within the last couple of years that looked at it a little bit more, but there was nothing that they substantively changed. I think it is more of looking at what was adopted back in 2009 and making the consistency is important, I think. And I want to shout out to the solar agents that are before the commission weekly for doing a fantabulous job of making sure that the history of the structure is provided, because not necessarily has that been something that was in their thought process. And that is important. That does take a part of the the review process.
Yeah, and that's a good reminder to anybody who may be wanting to make any change to their house, just to know that, NPT is here as a resource for you to help. We love doing research. It only helps us understand our landmark more and can help you and the HCC understand your home and whether it may be more or less significant or what are the features that are worth protecting. And here's a question for you, Holly, which is, what are the next steps for continuing resilient preservation on the island and exploring these ideas? Are there any plans for a preservation plan?
Well, now that we have an active historical commission as well as a joint CLG, and for those of you that might not be familiar with the process, because we have two commissions, the HDC and the historical commission, we have a memorandum of understanding between the commissions as well as the Massachusetts Historical Commission, and they are required to meet jointly once a year. And now that we have the CLG, there are going to be some priorities that they'll want to both set, both commissions. And I know that a preservation plan would be something that we would consider. I've mentioned it to the historical commission as a goal down the road. It's important. If you talk to any preservation planning person, they're going to recommend having a preservation plan. But there's also different sizes. If anybody has heard Chris Skelly, who used to work for the Massachusetts Historical Commission as the local government's coordinator, he was very good about reminding commissioners and preservationists that you don't need to have a big plan as long as you have goals. And essentially, even this survey plan that we're going to be creating with this recent grant, because you have to obviously have a plan to figure out how you're going to tackle the entire island as a local district to survey it, it's in itself its own kind of preservation plan. So as a planner, of course, I love plans, and they're good. And Nantucket would benefit highly with a preservation plan.
Yeah. It's well, I'm just thank you for spending some time with us and sharing some of those guidelines. And I think when I was looking at other towns and municipalities and cities, I was really struck by how detailed our guidelines are. And I think that that's very helpful because it's easy to understand. You look at the town of Bedford, Mass. I don't know if they've updated since then, but that guideline was like a couple sentences long. And the more detail there is, the easier it is for the applicant to understand. And I think the point about, the Historic District Commission, they do not want to deny things. They want to get to that place where they can work with you is important. So thank you, Holly, for your time and for everybody who's on this morning. We're going to take our lunchtime break, get out